What happens when the very people who are supposed to protect your neighborhood turn into the biggest bullies on the block? Imagine this. You build something with your own money, your own hands, and your own dreams. Suddenly, a group of people who think they have more power than the law itself show up and try to take it all away. That's exactly what happened when the Homeowners Association decided to go after my dock. But here's the twist. What they didn't know was that the Coast Guard was watching too. And in the end, the same HOA that tried to destroy me had their own pier seized by the federal government. The dream of the dock. When I first moved into this lakeside community, I had one dream: to build a dock where my family could fish, relax, and enjoy the water. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about wealth. It was about creating a place of peace. I got the permits, followed the rules, and made sure everything was legal. But the HOA didn't like that. They saw my dock not as a dream, but as a threat. Why? Because it wasn't their idea. The HOA had always wanted full control over the shoreline. They wanted to dictate who could park a boat, who could fish, and who could even step near the water. My dock represented freedom. It represented independence. And to them, that was unacceptable. The HOA's first move. At first, they came with polite letters. They claimed my dock did not fit the community aesthetic. They said it was unsafe. They even went so far as to accuse me of trespassing on community property, even though the land belonged to me. It was laughable, but then the threats got louder. One morning, I walked outside and found a notice taped to my front door. Remove the dock within 30 days or face legal action. Imagine working day and night on something, putting your heart into it, and then seeing a piece of paper that threatens to tear it all down. I was furious, but more than that, I was ready to fight. The secret about their pier. Here's where things get interesting. While the HOA was obsessed with my dock, they conveniently forgot about their own pier. Yes, the HOA had a community pier that extended out further than mine, built years ago without proper permits. They claimed it was grandfathered in, but anyone with common sense could see it was just a massive wooden structure rotting into the water. Worse, people in the neighborhood had whispered for years that the HOA was renting out slips on the pier to boat owners outside the community for cash. That meant they weren't just hypocrites. They were running a side hustle under the radar. The escalation. The HOA called an emergency meeting about my dock. Neighbors gathered in folding chairs, sipping coffee and whispering while the board members stared me down. The president of the HOA stood up, pointing his finger like he was addressing a criminal. Your dock is a violation of community rules. It must be removed immediately, he said, his voice echoing across the room. I stood up too. Actually, my dock is fully permitted by the county. I followed every law. You're not above the law, no matter how much you think you are. Gasps filled the room. Some neighbors supported me quietly, nodding. Others just wanted the drama to end. But I wasn't backing down. The threats turned dirty. After that meeting, things got personal. The HOA started sending inspectors to my property, looking for any tiny violation. My grass was half an inch too tall. I got a fine. My trash bins weren't pulled in by 8:01 a.m. Another fine. They wanted to drown me in paperwork and fees until I gave up. But I kept receipts. I kept photos. I kept records of everything. And while they were busy trying to destroy me, they didn't realize I was quietly digging into them. The tip-off to the Coast Guard. One late evening, I stumbled across something shocking. The HOA pier wasn't just an eyesore. It extended into a navigable waterway, federal territory. And guess what? That meant it wasn't just a county issue. It was a Coast Guard issue. The more I researched, the clearer it became. The HOA never had federal approval for that pier. So I filed a complaint. Not out of revenge, but out of fairness. If they were going to threaten me for following the rules, then it was time someone looked at their structure. The day the Coast Guard showed up. Weeks passed. I almost forgot about the complaint until one Saturday morning when blue and white boats pulled up to the HOA pier. Officers stepped out, clipboards in hand, and began inspecting the structure. HOA members rushed out, panicked, trying to explain. But the officers weren't interested in excuses. They were interested in permits, and the HOA had none. Neighbors gathered around, watching in silence as the Coast Guard placed bright red, seized, stickers on the pier. The same board members who had mocked me, threatened me, and fined me into exhaustion now stood speechless as their pride and joy was officially shut down. The sweet irony. The HOA tried everything, pleading, arguing, even shouting at the officers. But it was too late. Their pier was gone. Their power crumbled in front of everyone. And my dock? Still standing. Still legal. Still mine. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. The HOA had gone to war to destroy my little dock. But in the end, their greed cost them everything. The lesson, what this story teaches, is simple. Bullies may win a few battles, but they never win the war. The HOA thought they could intimidate me, crush me with paperwork, and scare me into silence. But when you know your rights, when you document the truth, and when you refuse to bow down, you win. And sometimes justice comes in a way you never expected. CTA call to action. If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA, you know exactly how it feels to be pushed around. But remember this, knowledge is your greatest weapon. Always know your rights. Always keep records, and never be afraid to stand up. Backhand index pointing right, have you ever faced an unfair HOA? Share your story, because the more we speak out, the less power they have. And if you want more stories like this, stick around, because Section 2 of the saga is where things get even wilder. What happens when bullies lose their power? Do they admit they were wrong, apologize, and move on? Not this HOA. When the Coast Guard sees their pier, you might think the fight was finally over. But in reality, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. Because when powerful people lose control, they don't go quietly, they claw, they scratch, and they fight harder than ever. But sometimes the harder they fight, the faster they fall. The shock in the neighborhood. After the Coast Guard placed those bright red, seized, stickers on the HOA pier, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Some neighbors couldn't stop talking about it. People who had once stayed quiet about their frustrations suddenly felt bold. I remember one older neighbor walking past me and whispering, "Good job." Someone finally put them in their place. But not everyone was happy. The board members were humiliated. They had strutted around for years, acting like kings and queens of the community. Now, their grand pier was shut down for all to see. And the worst part for them? They couldn't hide it. Every neighbor who drove past the shoreline saw those stickers. Every visitor asked questions. And every answer made the HOA look weaker. The retaliation begins. Of course, the board couldn't stand the embarrassment. Instead of admitting their mistakes, they doubled down. Suddenly, I became target number one. They accused me of defaming the HOA. They sent more violation notices. They even tried to ban me from community events. But I stayed calm. I knew what they were doing, and I wasn't going to let them break me. Every letter they sent went into a folder. Every fine they issued was documented. And the more they pushed, the more ridiculous they looked. The court threats. Soon, I received a letter claiming the HOA planned to sue me. According to them, I was responsible for damaging the reputation of the community. Imagine that. The same people who broke federal law with their illegal pier were blaming me for making them look bad. I consulted with a lawyer, and guess what? The HOA had no case. In fact, my lawyer laughed when he read the letter. He said, "If they actually file this, it'll backfire harder than you could imagine." And that's exactly what happened. They tried to file, but the judge dismissed it immediately. The court reminded them that truth is not defamation. If anything, they had embarrassed themselves by operating outside the law. Neighbors start choosing sides. At first, most neighbors stayed neutral. Nobody wanted drama. But as the weeks passed, more people began speaking up. Stories started surfacing about the HOA's shady practices, unfair fines, secret deals, and intimidation tactics. My fight gave others the courage to share what they had been holding in for years. One family revealed they were fined hundreds of dollars for having a flower bed out of regulation. Another told me they had been banned from using the community pool because they spoke against the board. Slowly, the HOA's iron grip was slipping. The board once ruled with fear. But fear only works until people realize they're not alone. And now, the community was waking up. The HOA's final card. With their pier gone and their legal threats collapsing, the HOA played one last desperate card. They tried to rewrite the community bylaws. They wanted new rules that would give them even more control over private property. Their plan was simple: strip homeowners of their independence so the board could micromanage everything. But this time, the neighbors weren't silent. When the vote came, dozens of families showed up, more than the board had ever seen before. People were tired of being bullied. Voices that had once been quiet were now shouting no. The proposed changes failed miserably. For the first time in years, the HOA realized they weren't invincible. The personal toll. I won't lie, fighting the HOA wasn't easy. It was stressful, exhausting, and at times overwhelming. There were days I wanted to give up, days I questioned whether it was worth it. But every time I saw my dock, standing strong in the water, I remembered why I started. It wasn't just about wood and nails. It was about principle. It was about proving that no one is above the law, not even a homeowners association. And the more I fought, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every neighbor who had ever felt powerless, every family who had been bullied, every voice that had been silenced. The turning point. Months later, the HOA board held another meeting. But this one was different. Instead of the board barking orders and everyone else staying quiet, the room was filled with homeowners demanding answers. Why did you build a pier without permits? Where did the rental money go? Why are we paying fines while you break the law? The board had no answers. Their once unshakable authority crumbled in real time. And for the first time, it wasn't me standing alone. It was an entire community standing together. The fall of the old board. Eventually, elections came. The same people who had tried to destroy me, the ones who had abused their power for years, were voted out. One by one, new leaders stepped in, neighbors who wanted fairness, transparency, and real community. The old board left quietly, their pride shattered. Their pier was gone, their rules rejected, their power stripped away. And the neighborhood? It finally began to heal. The lesson for everyone. Looking back, it's almost poetic. The HOA tried to destroy my dock, but in the end, they destroyed themselves. They wanted control, but their greed took it away. The lesson is clear. When you stand up for what's right, even against powerful groups, you can win. Not because you're stronger, not because you're richer, but because the truth always wins in the end. Call to action, CTA. If you're listening to this and you're facing your own HOA nightmare, remember this. You are not powerless. Keep records, know your rights, and don't be afraid to speak up. Backhand index pointing right, have you ever fought back against an unfair HOA? Drop your story. It might give someone else the courage they need. And if you want more real stories of standing up to bullies and winning, don't forget to stick around, because there are many more battles like this one waiting to be told.